Welcome to the Prospective Doctor Podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Pre-med and medical students alike are encouraged to tune in each week for tips on how to become a strong med school candidate, gain acceptance into the school of your dreams, and succeed on your journey toward residency and becoming a doctor.
Hello, everyone. We're here for a super exciting and different episode. Today, we're having a different kind of episode where we have our first non-healthcare worker that I'm interviewing on the show, Emma Goldberg. I'm going to just give her an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm thrilled to be here, and it's so fun to be in conversation with you. I'm a writer for the New York Times, and I write a lot about medicine and particularly medical education. And I'm very interested in the issues of inequities, gender and racial inequities in particular within medicine. And I am also a voracious reader, especially of medical books. I love reading about, the culture of medicine and the perspectives of physicians on medical issues.
That's awesome, because I think I might be a little biased, but I think it's a great topic, not only for people who are in the field, but everyone has an experience with healthcare in their lifetime, whether or not it's for themselves or a loved one. So it's great to read about those kind of things. And I just love that you're highlighting such important topics in life, not only healthcare, but like you said, talking about gender issues and race issues are also important.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I mean, like you said, it's a critically important topic. And I think one of the really interesting things about this issue is it's important for doctors to follow, but it's also important for patients, which means it's important for all of us. And knowing more about the culture of medicine and of medical education means we're more informed as patients and more informed in terms of how we can establish a good relationship with our physicians and take care of our health.
Absolutely. So as you've mentioned, you are a journalist for the New York Times, and we just talked about a lot of your reasons why healthcare is an important topic to you. So you have a new book that's just being released called Life on the Line, Young Doctors Come of Age in a Pandemic. Can you tell us a little more about it?
Absolutely. So last year, as the pandemic was first hitting New York City, some medical schools decided to accelerate their graduations so that fourth-year students could move to the front lines and treat COVID-19 patients. I wrote an article about that for the New York Times, and then I started following a specific group of medical students and talking with them every day about what their experiences were like, taking the Hippocratic Oath on WebEx, immediately diving into treating patients in the middle of the pandemic. And as I was hearing about their experiences, I thought, this would be really interesting as a full book, and readers might want to follow the whole trajectory of what this unusual and really extraordinary experience is like. And the group of doctors who I followed are also a group who don't exactly look like conventional doctors in all ways. One is Hispanic, as only a small proportion of American doctors are. One is the first generation American, the child of immigrants. Another is Orthodox Jewish. Another is an LGBTQ doctor who was really interested in diving into this work, particularly because he knew the history of how patients were let down by the healthcare system during the AIDS crisis. So I wanted to write about what it means to be coming up in a new generation of doctors, just starting out in your career, and then face this extraordinary trial that puts all your aspirations to the test. And that's what my book follows. My book is about the unusual situation of being asked to dive into crisis care and really to put your life on the line and put your own health at risk. And to do so when you also have real aspirations and how the field could kind of operate in a different way than it always has, and how doctors could build much closer relationships with their patients than maybe they have historically done.
I love all of that because they were definitely in a unique position. I graduated, for the listeners out there, you guys have heard this a billion times, but I feel so old because I recently saw an Instagram post where it had my 9-year anniversary of graduating from medical school. So it was a completely different time, and I could definitely not imagine all of the stresses that come to medical school students right now anyway, with the lack of residency slots, and then to add the pandemic on top of that, that is just like a different kind of stress. And then I love that you had a diverse group of physicians, because not only are they navigating this world in the pandemic, they're navigating this world as a minority in healthcare, where you mentioned, I think Latinx doctors make up less than 5% of doctors. And previously, in one of my old jobs, I worked at an LGBT clinic. And while I'm not a member of the community, I am definitely an ally. And not only it's good to kind of figure out ways to connect with patients and to kind of discover yourself and the things that you're made of. There are a lot of stressors going from being on call all of those times, and then having that extra layer of the pandemic with so much being unknown. It is very great that they're there to share their story, especially for those that come after them.
I totally agree. I mean, that was one of the things I really have wanted to do with my reporting and with the book too, is spotlight people who are going into the field who might not have necessarily always seen themselves represented in medicine, but knew even more so that they wanted to go in and challenge old school biases, stereotypes, and look out for communities who look like them, and, you know, treat the types of patients who they might have grown up alongside, not knowing if they could get the best medical care and the best healthcare. So I wanted to spotlight people who were challenging the old school ways of medicine, and who also are, you know, fighting for representation in the field.
Yes, I love that. What would you say is the most surprising thing that you learned while putting this book together?
Absolutely. So first, I learned that the field of medicine wasn't always as homogenous as it is today. So a little over a century ago, there were more Black medical schools and more medical schools designed to train people from lower income communities to be doctors. And then there was this effort from medical reformers who decided that the field needed to be more exclusive and more restrictive. And there was actually an educator named Abraham Flexner who wrote a report called the Flexner Report that called for the closure of a lot of medical schools. And that especially impacted Black medical schools and some of the rural medical schools that had trained lower income doctors. Mm-hmm. And some researchers estimate that had some of those schools stayed open, we could have as many as 35,000 more Black doctors today who'd been trained. So I learned that the roots of the kind of homogeneity within medicine go really deep. And it was a real concerted effort from people within the field to decide that the field had to be more homogenous, more restrictive, which just means I think it's important for us to recognize that history as we're thinking about what it means to continue to try to open up the medical field, make it more welcoming and more representative of what the patient population looks like.
Absolutely. I think that we're just seeing more and more of that nowadays. There definitely has been a lot of the historic systemic racism that has impacted not only patients, but our physician workforce. Black Americans make up less than 5% of the population as well, like Latinx. And with all of the different things that we're seeing that are coming out, whether or not it's through different antiquated methods of assessing patients and different things like that, I think more and more will come out. But we have to get the word out and educate those, because otherwise they wouldn't know what is going on.
Absolutely. I could not agree with you more. And that's a really powerful way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
At Med School Coach, we know that getting into medical school is hard. In fact, 60% of pre-meds who apply to a medical school don't even get accepted. And if you want to get accepted into a top medical school, it's even harder. That's why more students than ever are turning to MCAT tutoring by Med School Coach. Our tutors are all 99th percentile scorers, have been through rigorous training, and can help raise your MCAT score by 12 points or more. You need every competitive advantage you can get to get into med school, so why not get one-on-one tutoring from Med School Coach? Our expert team will create a custom program just for you and help you master MCAT content where you need the help most. You'll raise your MCAT score. We guarantee it. Visit us online at medschoolcoach.com and use offer code PODCAST10 to save 10% up to $400 on a Med School Coach MCAT tutoring package. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and Med School Coach can help.
What do you think the pandemic has exposed to the healthcare system, well, about the healthcare system, given we've seen so many new things, and you're highlighting that in this book.
Well, one thing I think that the pandemic has really exposed is the challenge and the real need to think creatively about how to foster close and trusting doctor-patient relationships. And one thing that I learned from the doctors who I followed is just how challenging it was to really bond personally and emotionally with patients and build trust while treating COVID-19 patients. And one of the things that made that so challenging was that there were all of these new hurdles to giving medical care. Like doctors realized they had to minimize the amount of time that they were spending with patients to reduce the risk of exposure. They had PPE covering their faces, so it was hard for them to use their facial expressions to communicate. It was even harder for patients who didn't speak English in American hospitals and were relying on interpreters who were straining to make out what they were saying through the layers of PPE. So there were just all of these different layers of communication barriers and just emotional barriers that made it really hard for doctors to build relationships with their patients. And so I think it put a spotlight on the need to really talk about that and to talk about what it looks like to foster trust in the medical system. And then the other piece of the story, and something that I think the media has begun to talk about more and more, and it's so important, and activists have talked about more and more, is that the pandemic disproportionately, as we know, impacted and hit communities of color, low-income communities, communities where people were working on the front line and weren't able to socially distance and socially isolate. And we also know that patients have the best outcomes often when they're treated by doctors who look like them, and that Black patients have better outcomes when they're treated by Black doctors often. So I think we saw the real need to train a diverse medical workforce because patients were disproportionately hit when they were in communities of color. And we know that those patients have the best health outcomes when they're seen by doctors of color. So I think that that dynamic was really highlighted and amplified during the pandemic.
I love that. What you bring it down to, like you initially started, was it's all about trust. We have the most intimate relationships as physicians with our patients, where you're the first person seeing someone when they're born, and you're sometimes the last person who's holding their hands when they pass away, and then all of that fun stuff that comes in between. So it's all about this intimacy and these relationships. And sometimes people can build relationships a little stronger or have that trust with people who have some kind of connection or similarity with them. And we're not saying that all patients need to be seen by people from their specific groups, but it can build a little more trust. So it's working on educating people about how to connect, and then figuring out how to do that with all of the layers of the pandemic, where you can barely read someone's facial expression or hold their hand and things like that in the time of need.
Exactly. And I love the way you put those two together. You know, it's all about trust, whether it's building emotional relationships or thinking about who is represented in the medical workforce.
Yes. As someone who does not practice medicine, but has learned a lot through your journalism, what do you think should be the biggest change that healthcare needs?
Absolutely. That's a great question. As an outsider, first of all, I've been so grateful to be able to interview so many incredible doctors who will just walk me through their work, explain both the science and the culture of what they're seeing, and help me understand their experiences. And I love being able to bring that to non-medical audiences too. I think something I've learned is that there needs to be a real platform given to the youngest doctors and the more inexperienced doctors to share their views about what in medicine needs changing, and what needs to be prioritized in patient-doctor relationships. Because I think often new people coming into the field can see things that older and more experienced people don't. And I think that means that the youngest and newest doctors need a microphone to share their perspectives and to engage with older doctors, to have a dialogue and to feel like their voices will be heard and acted on. And that's one of the things I'm hoping my reporting can be, is a platform for young and inexperienced doctors to share their experiences, share their views, and feel like those can be amplified to a broader audience.
I love that, because it seems like in medicine, it's kind of like an old man's world, and we do a lot of things just because they were done before. And now we're in a time of innovation. So it's great to bring those younger voices in and kind of collaborate with that older school so that you can have change that we actually need.
At Med School Coach, we know that matching into the specialty of your choice and the residency program of your dreams has a dramatic impact on your career as a physician. And your USMLE score is the most important acceptance factor of all. That's why more students than ever are turning to Med School Coach for USMLE tutoring. Our tutors are all 260 plus scorers and have been through rigorous training. Plus, the average student who uses Med School Coach tutoring raises their score by 23 to 55 points. There is an enormous amount of material you need to know for Step 1 and Step 2, and Med School Coach can help you be smart about how to study. We'll create a custom program just for you. Then, we'll help you master USMLE concepts where you need help most. You'll raise your USMLE score. We guarantee it. Visit us online at medschoolcoach.com and use offer code PODCAST10 to save 10% up to $400 on a Med School Coach USMLE tutoring package. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and Med School Coach can help.
So I really appreciate you for doing the work out there, and I'm super excited to read your book. On that note, we've had a great discussion, and I want to just have our listeners know how they can contact you and where can they find your book.
Absolutely. Well, I'm on Twitter at Emma B. Go, and I always respond. I love to get DMs with ideas about medical stories that should be covered. That's really important to me. And you can also find my book at Barnes & Noble. You can find it at most local bookshops, on IndieBound, and on Amazon if that's your thing. But I always love to say support local bookshops. If you have one in your neighborhood, it's probably there, or you can ask them to order Life on the Line, Young Doctors Come of Age in a Pandemic. But it is available at most booksellers and online. It's called Life on the Line, Young Doctors Come of Age in a Pandemic, and it comes out on June 8th.
Thank you so much. And we will definitely place a link to where to find your book. And I just really appreciate you for coming out. It's not often or ever that I get to interview a journalist. So you have me feeling like Oprah for the day. So
oh my gosh,
I'm so excited.
I love to be on the other side of the conversation, because usually I'm the one asking a million questions, and it's so fun to get to talk about the work with someone who's so deeply immersed in it too. I mean, you know more than anyone, so it's fun to talk with the experts.
Oh, thank you so much. So at the time where this will be published, your book will already be out. So all of the listeners out there, it's time to kind of enrich yourselves. We're living in different times. So as a student, you will need to be looking forward to what your peers who have just gone through what you're going through now may be experiencing. And as people who may be in the pre-med realm, you can always look forward to the future. There's so much hope looking forward in medicine. And we're just here to support you and to kind of give you a little insight into different people's lives.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was the most fun. I loved getting to talk with you. And to all the listeners, I do love to get messages about ideas and things in medicine and medical education to cover. And one of the best ways to do that is just DM me on Twitter at Emma B. Go.
Thank you so much. And we'll place a link for your Twitter as well. To all of the listeners out there, pick up the book, subscribe to this podcast, and then I'll see you guys again next week. Bye.
Each episode of the Prospective Doctor podcast is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access articles, videos, webinars, and free tools to help you succeed on your journey toward medical school and beyond, visit our website, prospectivedoctor.com. We hope you tune in again next time.